Hi again. Since World War II, the field of military history has taken a very varied approach. Some historians concentrate on a particular campaign, particular geographical aspect of the war. Some will concentrate on the career of a particular leader and contrast it with another leader or another military figure and debate that. And some will concentrate on the technology. In Blood, Tears and Folly, Len Deighton has taken an approach which on one hand looks at the entire war and on the other hand goes into quite focused detail on certain aspects, the conduct of the leaders and generals, the politics behind it, also the technology and so on. And the overall product of this book is a really deep understanding of aspects which in some respects have been overlooked. In the introduction, for example, he notes that Japan and Germany had educational systems superior to most others in the world, and the generally high regard for science and engineering, but they lost the war. And why this happened is explained in the book in some detail. And it's nuggets like that, observations sprinkled throughout the book, that make it particularly interesting. Also in the introduction, he notes that many of the original sources, prime sources, were still alive, and he was able to interview them at the time of writing of the book. And these range from people like Adolf Galland, who was a very, very senior German fighter commander, to Freddy de Guinand, who was chief of staff to Montgomery, and even to Albrecht Speer, who was the Minister of Armaments under Hitler. And obviously scores of other people who gave their first-hand impressions of what was happening. And then again he reminds us that one good reason for looking again at the Second World War is to remind ourselves how badly the world's leaders performed and how bravely they were supported by their suffering populations. The book traces the causes of World War II back into World War I and even further in some cases, such as the Franco-Prussian War and the Russo-Japanese War. And he puts all these strands together and provides the historical, political and economic factors which paved the path to war. The first major section of the book covers the Battle of the Atlantic. And this resonated with me because my dad was a merchant seaman and crewed many of those convoys backwards and forwards across the Atlantic, quite often stopping in Liverpool, where he eventually met my mother. I'll just note that in the merchant service, when a ship was torpedoed and the crew had to take to the lifeboats, their pay stopped. And if they did manage to survive the Atlantic, it was without pay. The author dissects British naval power over the preceding centuries and tells us that in the course of history, up till the late 1800s, other countries built powerful fleets, none more so than Germany, who saw the Royal Navy as their prime challenge and wanted to match the fleet in terms of warships and also in manpower. I will mention that Len Deighton peppers the book with technological details of weapons, ships, tanks and aircraft, and discusses the development of these weapons by opposing sides and how they were matched in combat, how it was difficult to develop them and to procure them and so on, and why some were more effective than others. And he has a particular affinity for aircraft and an enthusiasm. In fact, one of his other previous military history books is called Fighter, and it's the story of the Battle of Britain. It goes into enormous detail on the development of the fighter aircraft. It has been noted that Germany sought to fight World War II with the weapons of the 1950s. In other words, they were developing rather futuristic weapons and aircraft. And this was not always successful. They faced technological difficulties with materials, and they were pushing the limits, obviously. Some were successful, but many of the designs were ruined really by the intervention of Hitler, who tried to have the designs conform to some idea of his, which made them unwieldy or too much of a multi-purpose weapon. So they were no good at any one purpose in the end. Turned out what would have been a superb aircraft, for example, turned into a white elephant. The section on convoys is extremely detailed, so I'll just mention one example he gives on the battle between the German submarines, the U-boats, and the convoys. And he gives us a sense of scale by saying, if you imagine that there's a U-boat in Vienna and it has been sent to attack a ship in London, that's the distance involved, and on the surface it travels at the speed of a bicycle, and under the surface it travels at walking pace. So that was the difficulty facing the U-boat commanders. However, as we know, they were extremely successful, and the wolf packs did cause massive damage to the convoys, to the point where the Battle of the Atlantic really was a close run thing, and together with the Battle of Britain were both really hinge points for us, for the British in World War II. Another major section of the book concerns Germany going to war, and I'll just read the chapter headings. Diplomatic manoeuvres. Britain and France go to war. The German campaign in Poland. The British Expeditionary Force. Norway. Winston Churchill. The German drive westward. Dunkirk. The end of France. Peace feelers. Isolationism under the United States. Peace feelers is very interesting. There's quite a bit about the move within the French and then the British governments or parts of them or particular personalities to try to reach an accommodation with Hitler. And luckily, Churchill was the man of the hour and withstood all such overtures. We then come to the German attack on the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. A couple of points extracted from a very, very lengthy section of the book. It's massively detailed. Tells us that the common reason given by Hitler for his attack on the Soviet Union was to get access to grain, to meat, to oil, and to Lebensraum, living room. Now, Len Deighton points out that he already had these. He had treaties with the Soviet Union which guaranteed the supplies, the trade routes for these commodities. And at the time, in 1942, when Hitler decided to attack, Germany was enjoying a very high standard of living, was quite prosperous. And in fact, the Russians were helping the German arms industry. Then another truism is that there were delays in instituting Operation Barbarossa, which led to them not actually reaching Moscow itself. And this has largely been attributed to having to help out the Italians who were bogged down in Greece. But Len Deighton points out, and for me this was a revelation, that actually the plan for Barbarossa was flawed. It wouldn't have worked anyway. And one of the reasons for this is that the OKW, the German High Command, proposed a coordinated and centralized thrust directly at Moscow, kind of on the Blitzkrieg model from 1940. But Hitler wanted to divert, to encircle and subjugate various population centers, and also to massacre large portions of the populations of the Ukraine and some of the other Russian republics, Soviet republics. And this was actually his true purpose. It was annihilation, and it was the seeds of what became the Holocaust. Next, the book looks at the Pacific War and the origins of that. And Japan's entry into the war was an area which, again, I was very much a novice at understanding. So the trade pressures on Japan, who were very devoid of raw materials, particularly oil. They didn't produce it themselves, and they were dependent on trade. And this was stymied by the combined efforts of the United States, United Kingdom, and the Dutch. And this put tremendous pressure on Japan to militarize to the point where they saw the only solution was to go to war with initially the United States and then the British Empire. And even though you can see it from the Japanese point of view, what the Japanese did in the territories they conquered was atrocious, and their treatment of prisoners of war and civilian populations, including children, was a war crime of the worst kind. So obviously this is all leading up to Pearl Harbor, which really wasn't predicted, and one of the reasons was that both the United States and the United Kingdom regarded the Japanese as not being a military nation of any significance. They didn't really have any respect for the Japanese fighting man, and they didn't have any respect for the equipment. Whereas the reality was that aircraft like the Zero Sen was a very, very efficient fighter. Their warships were of very high standard of engineering and crewed by very competent and effective seafarers, and it was a very disciplined military overall. They took military service very, very seriously, and a lot of our opinion was without a doubt racialist. We just didn't see the Japanese as we saw them as being second class, and we paid the price for that. So Pearl Harbor, which according to the comedian Al Murray was where the Americans were taken by surprise 18 months into a global war, really was a reflection of peacetime military. The priorities, the red tape, the chain of command, the communications were all on a peacetime basis, and there was very much a lack of urgency, and it was a Sunday. So one of the things that again I learned for the first time was the Japanese innovation was to take torpedo casings, fill them with high explosive, and drop them as bombs. And they were very, very effective bombs. And one dropped onto the deck of the battleship USS Omaha, penetrated the deck right into the magazine, obviously full of explosives, and detonated. This lifted the entire battleship 20 feet out of the water. And my jaw dropped at the idea of this, what it must have been like to see that. A massive battleship. I mean, if you go down to the Thames and look at the Belfast, a ship in that size range, 20 feet out of the water, and then its back broken, slamming back down. And you know that was an impressive feat of targeting. But one point that one of the many points that Len Deighton keeps giving us is that the Japanese would have been better, from their point of view, concentrating on destroying the port infrastructure in the harbour, the warehouses, the cranes, the dock facilities, rather than the warships, because that would have denied the United States Navy Pearl Harbor as a base to then prosecute the entire Pacific War, which in the event, hard fought war, the US Marines and the Navy had a very hard job fighting, the island hopping campaign, brutal hand-to-hand fighting, artillery barrages and so on. I have spoken to one or two people who took part in that, and it was war at its most violent. And eventually, the Americans penetrated deeply enough to capture the Marianas Islands, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, from which they could then launch raids directly onto the Japanese home islands using the massive B-29 bombers. And this was the start of Operation Meeting House, where they basically launched firestorm attacks on Tokyo and the other major cities using napalm, which was newly invented for that specific task. And it was a relentless, the first such attack on Tokyo burnt an area of 16 square miles. Set fire completely. Japanese houses, wood and paper and so on, very narrow streets. And it was similar to Operation Gomorrah, which was the firestorm attack on Hamburg, but on an even bigger scale. And that continued right until the atomic bombs. And again, the received wisdom is that it was the atomic bombs that caused Japan to surrender. Len Deighton points out that there was 800 aircraft raiding after that, which did actually, with the firebombs again, which did actually eventually lead to Japan's surrender. And another piece of received wisdom is that the atomic bombs actually saved lives, possibly millions of lives, because an invasion of the home islands would have led to suicidal resistance and mass killing of the Japanese population. And Colonel Cooper, Jeff Cooper, who was a US Marine officer at the time, told me that that's what they were training to do, that the resistance they'd met on Okinawa led them to believe that they were going to have to basically kill the majority, particularly of the male population of Japan. So in that sense, it's true that the atomic bombs did save lives, but there's another aspect too. There was a very, very effective blockade by the United States Navy, particularly submarines. And even without an invasion, the coming winter, the Japanese people would have lost possibly millions of people due to cold and hunger. So combination of all those factors, the firestorms, the atomic bombs, and the blockade, did cause the surrender. So overall, Len Deighton has scant regard for many of the leaders during the Second World War. There were egotistical generals who wanted to outdo their rivals. There were scheming politicians who would sabotage the work of their own allies to progress their own advancement. Inter-service rivalry was another factor, and an amazing story emerged when he was discussing some of the naval engagements. The attack on the Bismarck, the German pocket battleship, the Bismarck. During the attack, the Bismarck had been severely damaged, and flights of swordfish torpedo bombers, which were biplanes, very obsolete biplanes, took off from the carriers to finish off the Bismarck, and they were actually fired at by our own warships, notably the King George V, because the Navy disdained the aviation side, even their own Fleet Air Arm, to the point that they would shoot at them rather than let them finish off the bismuth. They wanted the glory for themselves. This is absolutely unbelievable. So the only reason that all this rivalry and backbiting and jealousy didn't cause us to lose the war was that the Germans were even worse. And it's quite well explained in the book. The Nazi Party were basically, someone once described them as, pigs in a trough kind of society. This review only skims the surface of a truly fascinating, detailed and revelatory history. Len Deighton is known for his espionage spy stories, his fiction, and he really does know how to tell a story. He's taken that skill into the military history realm, and this book deserves to stand alongside the works of Sir Anthony Beevor, Sir Max Hastings and James Holland. And it's a book that really did increase my knowledge of the events of World War II.